Hi everyone, today I'm going to be talking about some books that I only heard about from booktube. So I only discovered booktube less than a year ago at this point, and as I'm sure you all know, there are some books that are super popular on booktube, and quite a few of them I had never heard of before. In general, I find it really interesting to watch trends. There have been a few times this summer where there was a book that I heard about from somebody's video. Then all of a sudden, over the next like 4 to 6 weeks, it seemed like everybody would be buying it and starting to read it. And sometimes people even finish it and review it. No, but like seriously, that doesn't bother me at all that stuff becomes popular. I think I just find it really fun to watch how something goes from being mentioned in one place and suddenly it seems like everybody's reading it. But that also makes it really fun because it definitely makes me want to read those things as well, just because I suddenly I'm hearing about something everywhere and I get really curious. And I think that's probably how books getting popular on booktube works in general. There are plenty of things that are popular on booktube that I already knew about or had read. Like a good example would be Brandon Sanderson. I've been a Brandon Sanderson fan for like 10 years now, but without a doubt, he is incredibly popular on booktube right now. And I think everybody that reviews science fiction and fantasy has read or is reading or is rereading Brandon Sanderson right now because Rhythm of War is coming out soon. So I'm not going to include stuff like that I was already familiar with. This is going to be a list of some books that I had really never heard of before I started watching booktube. Although, of course, like when you meet somebody and then you start seeing them everywhere, books are kind of like that. Like once you hear about a book, that's when you start seeing it everywhere. One thing I should also say is that I'm not a huge YA reader. I haven't read very much YA recently, and the sort of modern YA genre didn't really exist when I was in the YA demographic. So some of the books that are on this list are YA. I do watch some channels where people read a mixture. I know that in general YA is really popular on booktube, and I have no problem with YA. It's just not a genre I've ever really gotten into. So I'll probably talk about a few books in here that are popular YA books, but probably mostly adult fantasy. There are also a few things that are maybe either kind of borderline or that I don't really know if they're YA or not, and we'll find out if I ever read them. When I was making this list, which was basically just me writing down, okay, what have I heard about a lot on booktube that I don't really know what it is or haven't read, and just writing those things down in notes for myself, I noticed there are a lot of assassin books on this list. So for some reason, booktube just loves assassins. I've heard people say before that like assassin fantasy is a genre, and I didn't really believe that. I was thinking like, how many books about assassins are there really? But it turns out there are a lot. So yeah, expect some assassins on this list. I will maybe say a little bit about each book or author, but just keep in mind, this is a list of books that I haven't read and know very little about, which is always fun to watch somebody talk about books that they don't know anything about, because I'm sure I'll get all sorts of things wrong. But this is going to be my list of books that I only heard about on booktube. First off is actually a book that I am reading at this very moment, and that book is Malice by Gwynne. It's the first book in the Faithful and the Fallen series. This is more of a recent booktube favorite. I think it's sort of probably in the middle of the upswing of its popularity right now. I feel like I heard about it for the first time ever, maybe like 6 weeks, maybe 2 months ago, and now I have seen so many people pick it up or review it. It took me a little while to get into it, but I'm starting to get into the swing of things now. It's a pretty traditional epic fantasy. There are chosen ones and anti-chosen ones, pretty big cast of characters. There are some different kingdoms and different mythological creatures. So mostly what I've heard about it is that it's pretty traditional, but well done and good action scenes. And I feel like it's still too early for me to pass judgment, but I've gone from skeptical to cautiously optimistic as I am reading it. So hopefully I will end up really liking it. But this is definitely one that I think is having a huge spike in popularity right now from what I've seen on booktube. And I think that's really cool because this series has been out for a while. I think the author has even written like a follow-up series to this. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong. So I think it's cool that a book that has been out for like, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years at least is suddenly now getting a bunch more people interested in it. And I think that's one of the fun things about booktube and being able to talk about books and see what other people are reading. A few of the things that I'm going to mention on this list are probably things that used to be super popular and maybe people don't read them so much anymore, but they're just things that I've seen on people's shelves or people have mentioned often enough. So I feel like one of those books is Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. This is a book that I feel like I've heard mentioned a fair bit, and I think it probably more in some older videos. I also feel like I have not heard people mention the sequels as much as the original. So I don't know if that means that the sequels weren't good or people just generally got sick of this series. So I don't know how popular this one is anymore, but when I sat down to make my list of things that I had never heard of before BookTube, this was pretty high up on the list because I had never heard of it. I'm pretty sure that this is an adult fantasy, but it also seems like some people have categorized it more as YA. Seems like almost anything can get categorized as YA. I guess if it has people, under the age of 25 in it or something like that. I don't really know. I'm a little bit confused still as to where people are actually drawing those boundaries. But anyway, I've heard that Nevernight is pretty dark. Seems like it's about an assassin. I don't know if it's about an assassin school or just an assassin. I don't know too much about this one. I don't get a strong feeling that it's something I would like to pick up, but let me know down in the comments if this is something that you really like and if you think I would like it based on my tastes. The next thing I want to mention is the Book of the Ancestor series by Mark Lawrence, where the first one is Red Sister. This is definitely a series I've seen get mentioned a lot. And this is one that's going to make me feel kind of old because I had heard of the author, Mark Lawrence. I think I heard of him when his first trilogy was coming out, probably around 10 years ago at least. And I think I maybe read the first book in that trilogy and it wasn't really for me and I kind of forgot about him as an author. But I don't hear anyone really mentioning his older books. I hear people talking about this newer trilogy. It's also about an assassin. Until I started watching BookTube, I wasn't really keeping track of Mark Lawrence. I didn't realize he had a newer trilogy, but it seems like it must be much more popular because I've heard just like a lot more about Red Sister. I can't even remember if I've heard anyone mention his older stuff. It seems like this is another assassin school book. I think there are assassin nuns in this one. I think he has another book that came out just this year, The Girl and the Stars, which I'm pretty sure is set in the same world or setting. I actually feel kind of intrigued to try out Red Sister. I feel like assassin nuns do sound kind of cool. And it seems like a lot of people are liking this series, so it's definitely something that intrigues me. The next book I'll mention is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I think I've heard people talk about multiple books in this series, so that's usually a good sign that it's not just the first one. I get the feeling that this is a sci-fi dystopian book. I feel like dystopian kind of had its moment a while ago, but it also seems like this book is kind of like borderline YA adults. Like maybe it starts out more YA or has younger characters and then gets a little bit more mature. I'm not too sure. It seems like it's set on Mars and there are characters in different social classes or castes that are assigned based on color. So that's all I really know about this series. I'm not a huge sci-fi dystopian lover, but I know some people seem to really like this series, and it's one that I had never heard of this author, I had never heard of the series before I started watching BookTube. Now I'm going to mention a couple of YA authors that I feel like I just need to mention because they seem so universal on BookTube, and they also, as far as I know, are incredibly popular. I am just so out of the loop when it comes to YA that I just wasn't paying attention and somehow, believe it or not, hadn't heard of them. So the first one, you may not believe me that I had never heard of her, but Leigh Bardugo. I know she is incredibly popular. It seems like the book I hear about the most from her is Six of Crows. I know most of her, or maybe all of her YA books are all set in the same general setting or universe. I actually read earlier in the year her only and newest adult contemporary urban fantasy book, Ninth House, which was super dark and messed up, but I actually really enjoyed it. I think she's a good writer. But in terms of the YA stuff, I've heard some really mixed things, but it also seems like something either everybody has read or just something a lot of people read when they were getting into fantasy or reading more YA before they started reading more adult fantasy. So I actually just read Shadow and Bone, which was her first book, a couple of days ago because I was just curious. I know Six of Crows is the one people usually mention, but I'm a completionist. If there's like a setting or a universe, I usually like to start with the first book. And I'll be honest, it wasn't really for me. I have this problem with a lot of YA books that the setting and the concepts will sound really, really cool to me, and I think I'm gonna like the book, and then I'm just completely unable to connect to the characters, or the plot just seems kind of superficial. And again, I think there are some really great YA books. I haven't read a lot of YA, so I'm not trying to trash the genre at all. That was my experience, and that was kind of my experience with Shadow and Bone. I think I'm just getting to the age maybe where I'm not connecting with books about teenagers as well as I used to. Yikes. My husband just pointed out that maybe if I was going to read one of her books, I should have started with the one that everyone reads instead of the one that I don't hear anyone talk about. But, you know, maybe he has a point. I don't know. Also, there is a Netflix series coming based on her Grishaverse books, so maybe I will enjoy watching that now that I know a little bit more about the series, even if I didn't really enjoy the books, because my taste in television can be a lot more indiscriminate than my taste in books, let's be honest. The other YA book I want to mention, with more assassins, believe it or not, is Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. I had never heard of Sarah J. Maas before I started watching BookTube. I don't feel terribly interested in reading her books. I know she has written a lot of them, and it seems like Throne of Glass, I can't remember the name of the series, but it looks like a pretty long series, and it seems like the main character is an assassin. I'm not sure if there's an assassin school or just one singular assassin. And I know she has a few more series that have come out since then. I think at least one of them was adult fantasy. Just honestly, based on the covers, and I do try not to judge things by the covers because some of my favorite books have really bad 1980s covers. Even so, I'm just getting this vibe or this feeling that I'm not really going to like Sarah J. Maas, but I am totally open to your comments and changing my mind if you think this is something I should definitely read. Next, I want to mention V.E Schwab and Vicious. Actually, I had come across V.E Schwab I think, on the shelf in bookstores in the last few years. And I think I actually had read at least one book in the Shades of Magic trilogy before I started watching BookTube. I can't remember exactly. So I can't claim that I had never heard of V.E Schwab, at least. So maybe you guys will think I'm not totally clueless here. But it seems like Vicious is the book of hers that's the most popular. I enjoyed the Shades of Magic trilogy. I think there were things it did really well. It was kind of a average series for me. I had times where I enjoyed the characters and the setting. I did not think it was great fantasy, but it was not quite on the level of like a candy book, but it was enjoyable enough. But it seems like Vicious is the book of hers that people are the most excited about. Based on the description, it is not something that gets me too excited to read it. It seems like it's about college students with supernatural abilities, and maybe it's a little bit darker. I'm not sure. I am looking forward to V.E Schwab's new book, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, that's coming out, I think, this fall. I thought the synopsis on that sounded really interesting, and I am very interested in books about immortal characters. That's something that I find fascinating. So yeah, a lot of these books have either immortal characters or school stories, and I also have a real weakness for school stories. I don't know, I've never read actually no, I have read an assassin school story before. It was by Gail Carriger, I think it's called Etiquette and Espionage series, and that was YA as well, and I really liked that series. It's very funny. So anyway, maybe some of these books are books I need to give a chance to because they do have tropes that I enjoy. So that's my list of books that I was clueless about and had never noticed before I started watching BookTube videos. I would very much appreciate some of you, especially if you've watched my other videos, let me know if there are any of these that I should be reading. I probably won't read them all at once, but I'm totally open to trying things, even if I think they might be things that I don't like. I think I'm pretty good at giving things a fair chance once I try them. I want to give a quick mention also to an author that I have definitely read a lot of, but it was many years ago, and I'm seeing her a lot on BookTube right now. That is Robin Hobb and her Farseer trilogy. I read that, I think, gosh, it must have been in middle school that I read it. And I think I even mentioned Robin Hobb on one of my earliest videos, which was a series that maybe it was like my first video. I think it was like books I'm not going to reread or something like that. But honestly, I am seeing so many people mention the trilogy recently and talk about Robin Hobb, and she's still writing. I am kind of starting to change my mind about that. It's my reasons for not reading Robin Hobb had nothing to do with not thinking it was good. I think the Live Ship trilogy, which was her second trilogy, I remember that as being still one of the most creative and best like fantasy settings and trilogies I've ever read. But I think I do feel kind of this sense of exhaustion when I think about going back and rereading like 9 books that I already read as a teenager, 15 years ago. But even so, when I hear people being excited about her books, it does make me want to go and revisit that. So I'm just going to give that an honorable mention. A book I had definitely heard of, but feel a little more excited to go reread because of BookTube. I hope that this was a fun video. I hope I didn't butcher talking about any of these books, but feel free to let me know if I did. I'm fine. I'm open to apologizing for anything I accidentally said that completely mischaracterized your favorite book. And let me know if there are any books that you have seen all over the place on BookTube that I didn't mention. It might just be because it's something I was already familiar with, or it might be that I'm just clueless. So let me know. Thanks for watching.